Is Trump mentally unfit to be president? That is an awkward question, but it's one that's being asked on every major news network in America.
President Trump's fitness for office is now the top story in the country.
Reports suggest that even Trump's advisors are worried about it.
Everyone around the president questions his intelligence and fitness for office.
100% of the people around him.
Concerns have gotten so bad that Trump agreed to be screened for dementia as part of his last health exam. None of this has to do with Trump's political positions. They have to do with his ability to understand the world around him and make good decisions.
Everybody wants to know, is this president of sound mind?
And if talking about this kind of thing makes you uncomfortable, wait till you see how much it's stressing out actual mental health experts.
In a series of tweets, the president insisted that he is like really smart and a very stable genius.
Last October, a group of 27 mental health experts published this book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. In it, they warned that Trump's behavior shows him to be dangerously unstable, describing him as a pathological narcissist who's delusional, suffers from paranoid ideation, lacks conscience and empathy, and exhibits a host of destructive and dangerous psychiatric symptoms. Yeah, it's rough. 2 months after its publishing, the book's editor met with 12 US senators to talk about Trump's mental fitness. That editor's name?
It's Dr. Bandy Lee. I am a forensic psychiatrist at Yale School of Medicine and an internationally recognized expert on violence.
Since the book came out, Dr. Lee has become kind of the face of mental health experts warning about Trump.
We express our consensus view that Mr. Trump is a danger to national and international security. Some of the psychological signs are impulsivity, recklessness, paranoid reactions, having a loose grip on reality, lacking empathy, having rage reactions. All of these are highly associated with violence.
This week's chaos in the Trump administration is by now unsurprising and was, in effect, predicted by the new book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president, edited by Bandy Lee, MD, a psychiatrist. The book includes and validates some of the general news media's speculation about Donald Trump's mental capacity. Henry Friedman, associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, on the role of Donald Trump's cabinet relevant to this week's Tillerson story. He says, a paranoid, hypersensitive, grandiose, ill-informed leader such as Donald Trump, who has surrounded himself with a cabinet and set of advisors who either are unable to bring him out of his paranoid suspicions and insistencies, or worse, identify with his positions, represents a multi-dimensional threat to our country and the world. And Dr. Lee, when a psychiatrist sees this that way, that's the definition of the duty to warn.
Exactly. When silence contributes to harm to the public health, then we do have a duty to speak out. After the conference, hundreds of mental health professionals got in touch with me, expressing their same concern.
This is an historic work in the history of American psychiatry. We have never been in this place before. Thank you both very much.
Dr. Bandy Lee is an internationally recognized expert on violence. She organized the Duty to Warn conference and edited the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. Lay out what your concerns are as a psychiatrist.
There is very little inhibition in place right now. Within 5 minutes of the commander-in-chief's orders, nuclear missiles could be launched without question. And
how does that relate to his mental fitness?
And of course, his decision-making capacity, having such levels of impulsivity, having a loose grip on reality, and being so fragile in his ability to cope with ordinary stresses, such as basic criticisms or unflattering news.
A bill on Capitol Hill that could start a formal process to evaluate any president's mental fitness is getting more interest, with 56 co-sponsors, all Democrats. The Democrat who introduced the bill joins me now, Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Congressman, thanks so much for being here. You and several of your Democratic House colleagues met with a psychiatry professor from Yale, Dr. Bandy Lee. She told CNN today, quote, as the president is unraveling, he seems to be losing his grip on reality and reverting to conspiracy theories. There are signs that he is going into attack mode when he is under stress. That means he has the potential to become impulsive and very volatile, unquote. Did she say that to the assembled congresspeople?
Well, I think that Dr. Lee and other psychiatrists who've been up to meet with members of Congress have been predicting increasingly delusional and paranoid behavior on the part of the president. Of course, we're not mental health professionals, we're not psychiatrists, that's not our role, but we do have a very defined and important role under the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which is to set up a body that could act with the vice president in the event of an emergency when the president becomes unable for mental or physical reasons to successfully discharge the powers and duties of office.
Sure,
so the bill just sets up the body that would be able to go to work if there were a real crisis.
Well, that's a terrible lack of empathy. It shows, as in the most recent instance in Puerto Rico, a complete incapacity to feel what they're feeling and to protect them in the way that our government is supposed to.
Let me add one more. How about the inability to ever admit you were wrong, even if you have changed a position? What does that indicate?
Well, profound denial, a rigidity, a kind of preference for one's self-importance and delusions of one's perfection over the reality.
You know, on the radio, many of our callers ask the question or posit the notion that Donald Trump is mentally ill. You assert that that's not the right question. That's not the relevant. Why is that not the right question?
Well, there are a number of reasons. One, being mentally ill is not a disqualification for high office. Just think about Abraham Lincoln and Winston
suffered from
Churchill.
depression.
Exactly. Great leaders. Second of all, having a mental illness isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about functional impairment, somebody who can't process information, who can't make subtle, nuanced discriminations, who can't consult other people, but who gets overwhelmed by his own personal insecurity and urgency and has to lash out impulsively and vindictively.
Are you just describing the president in those last couple of sentences?
I'm describing my experience of the president, yeah.
As an expert on violence, I can tell you that previous violence shows an indication for possible future violence, and he has already shown verbal aggressiveness, history of sexual assault, incitement to violence at his rallies, endorsement of violence in public speeches, and he's shown an attraction to violence and powerful weapons, as well as he has taunted hostile nations with nuclear power. All these things are signs of danger. It's really an unprecedented event that such a large number of mental health professionals have come forth about their concerns about any president.
The group that you're a part of, the psychiatric group, you're a contributor to a book called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. What are some of the key concerns about Trump that you and your colleagues raise?
Well, I wrote a letter together with Judith Herman to the New York Times in which we raised two issues. One was his relation to reality, which is I would say solipsistic and untenable and very dangerous to everyone.
What do you mean solipsistic?
Solipsistic from within the self. In other words, he only sees the world from within his sense of self. He can't have empathy for others. He can't really think into the future, the consequences of his actions, because he's totally preoccupied with the immediate event and how he can deal with it or manipulate it as emerging through the perception on the part of his sense of self. That's very extreme. People who are psychotic behave that way.
Nixon was a criminal president. We've never been confronted with this kind of consistent dishonesty in terms of the president projecting a public debate that is based from the beginning of his presidency through today. Look indeed what he's tried to do, the pretzel he got himself into trying to explain the Russians in Afghanistan with no understanding of the history of his own time and hasn't bothered to do the work. That's one reason that Mattis, Tillerson, and others came to the conclusion that we have a national emergency. The national emergency is not the wall, it's Donald Trump.
At times of tragedy, people look to their leaders. We've obviously looked at the president's reaction to the man sending the pipe bombs, to the attack in the synagogue. What is your take on all of this?
Most presidents in a moment of crisis like this, especially with such a huge emotional element, most of us are hurting. They heal, they unite, they inspired. You know, it's not exactly rocket science. You look all the way through American history. That's what presidents do. It's not in Donald Trump's software to do this. He's a one-trick pony. His single political MO is to try to divide and conquer, to pit groups against one another and benefit from it politically, even after a tragedy like what happened on Saturday. What other president in our history, Stephanie, would have made those jokes he did about his hair, would have gone on with this political rally just a few hours after this happened? It gets to empathy. You know, one of the things that we ask from a president is to have a little bit of empathy.
To my fellow doctors and to fellow scientists and to just concerned people that there was something seriously the matter.
I'm concerned about many things about his mental instability, but especially in the immediate present, I'm most worried about his unfettered authority to launch nuclear weapons.
We also can understand psychopathology, this idea of a feeling that one has the right to do whatever they desire to do. We also see the idea of, talk about obsession and compulsive behavior being played out.
There are people who lie all the time and don't know it. Confabulation is when someone tells you something that's absolutely wrong and they firmly believe it to be true. This happens a lot with people with neurologic disease. When you see someone who lies all the time, you say, what could be wrong with that person? Is this a personality problem? Or is this a brain problem? Is it getting worse?
We feel generally that there should be a more extensive kind of examination of American presidents or potential American presidents, and especially in relationship to their potential response to an extreme crisis, such as nuclear threat.
Trump has his finger on the triggers of 3,000 or 4,000 nuclear weapons. It's clear that if he even took one step in that direction, he could turn the world wars and the genocides of the 20th century into minor footnotes in the history of human violence. We can see a level of violent destructiveness on this earth that we've never seen before.
The president is a raving lunatic. He is not well. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Andrew Gillum, the former Democratic mayor of Tallahassee, who came in second in last year's race for governor in Florida. He was echoing what has become mainstream thinking now about the mental health of the president of the United States during a week in which the president has said he is the king of the Jews, the second coming of God, the chosen one. It is the same week in which, even though he sees himself as a king, a god, a chosen one, Denmark somehow found the strength to defy him and refuse to sell Greenland to the United States. Dr. Dodas contributed articles to the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. A new edition of that book was published this year with 10 more entries, which then changed the subtitle to 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. In that book, Dr. Dodas writes, Mr. Trump's sociopathic characteristics are undeniable. They create a profound danger for America's democracy and safety. Over time, these characteristics will only become worse.
Because he has a fundamental need to be all-powerful and all-loved, can't stand challenges. And the nature of democracy is that it challenges people. We have more than one opinion. So the more it was predictable that once he got into a position where people would challenge him, there are two parties, he would become more unhinged. The more unhinged he becomes, the more paranoid and the more violent, potentially.
Dr. Bandy Lee warns Trump is going to get worse and it will become uncontainable.
I've never seen anything like it.
Peter, I was one of those people who bought the book by a bunch of psychiatrists in 2017 called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, all about his apparent mental health issues. But from your book, we learned that John Kelly, Trump's own White House chief of staff, also bought the book to read and thought it was a helpful guide to a boss who he came to consider as a pathological liar. Donald J. Trump has been a very loud some might say too loud part of our political scene for over 7 years now. And yet, I would argue that we as a political culture, as a media industry, as an American public, as a country, we still end up normalizing him.
Welcome, everyone, to this special Mid-Atlantic Salon event. My name is David Troy, and I'm the host and curator of TEDx Mid-Atlantic. Steve is an expert on undue influence, brainwashing, and unethical hypnosis, and he's the author of best-selling books, Combating Cult Mind Control and The Cult of Trump. And for over 40 years, he's helped thousands of individuals and families recover from undue influence or mind control. He is sought after as one of the foremost authorities on undue influence, brainwashing, deprogramming, and controlling groups and individuals.
But what I've learned is that when you're in a mind control cult, you don't feel it, you don't think you are, but you'll say that other group was, and I will often show videos of the Heaven's Gate people before they died. Oh, you may think I'm in a cult, but this is the wisest thing I've ever done. I'm going up to the spaceship. Literally, they talked like that. And I've yet to show that video to anyone and not have them say, oh man, those people were in a cult. Those people were brainwashed, right? So the idea is to not attack the leader, the doctrine, or the policy straight on, but find examples.
Donald Trump is likely guilty of mass murder. He's guilty of willful or at least grossly negligent manslaughter of hundreds of thousands of Americans. And this is not ordinarily talked about.
So this is, are you talking about the response to COVID and his delayed response to that and not taking it seriously and telling people to drink bleach or shine a light inside the body?
Had we intervened in time, the vast majority of deaths from COVID in the United States would not have happened.
You've described, I guess implicitly, Donald Trump as a threat to America's soul.
The trajectory we are in is very perilous. Since the spread of the Trump contagion, I've also described the course we are on as a death spiral.
The reason why so many of you have potentially heard of her, why she's such an important guest to have tonight, is that she led a group of mental health professional colleagues in diagnosing and writing about, breaking the silence about Donald Trump, our previous president.
In 2017, when I first held a major conference at Yale and published The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, people might have recoiled at our use of the word dangerous. Now, 7 years later, many are feeling the existential dangers to our democracy, to our civilization, and to everything we have cherished, including our sense of decency, humanity, goodness, and truth.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Don Lemon Show. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Dr. Bandy Lee. Dr. Bandy Lee is a forensic psychologist and academic whose work is focused primarily on violence, and a book on the psychology of the former president himself, President Donald Trump. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for coming on. The name of your book is The Psychology of Trump Contagion. The subtitle, I think, really explains what it is. The subtitle is what?
An existential threat to American democracy and all humankind. The reason why we came out saying that he was a public health threat, not just someone with an individual dangerous psychology, but that because of the powerful and influential position to which he was elected, he would spread his symptoms over time to the point where his individual psychological dangers have become social, cultural, geopolitical, and civic dangers.
Dr. Lee, welcome back to the program. You've been writing and talking about Donald Trump and his threats and his psychology for a long time, and how the APA went after you, and I want to get into that. But most recently, Donald Trump is now talking about bloodbaths and Jews, kind of in the not quite in the same sentence, but in ways that are bringing back some really scary echoes. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me back. So we've been warning against the psychological dangers of Donald Trump ever since he won the first presidency. And what we had been warning against, that his psychological dangers would translate into social, cultural, civic, and geopolitical dangers over time if he were not properly contained, has now come to pass.
And that is why it was so critical that we come in early and alert the public. That's why we mobilized as mental health professionals. In 2017, soon after inauguration, we got together as a group to do the conference at Yale School of Medicine that I organized, that we pulled together to publish The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump within that year. And after that, hundreds of, and later thousands of psychiatrists and other mental health experts joined us. That's how we formed the World Mental Health Coalition. I myself was never political before. I wasn't using psychiatry to support a political position. I was coming out as a health professional concerned about public safety and humanity's survival. These are overarching concerns that we are actually legally and ethically obligated to act upon.